Hoo-hoo! It's a great day to be in geometry. I'm Miss Legg-Battles, and I'm here today to talk to you about angles of elevation and angles of depression. In the first diagram here, I've illustrated the angle of elevation. I have my student here, Jim, sometimes known as Slim, looking up here at his friend in the hot air balloon. So, in a problem, we might describe an angle of elevation. So the angle of elevation is formed by his line of sight distance here and a horizontal line. Next, I have illustrated the angle of depression. The angle of depression might be described when we talk about his friend up here looking down at Slim. So the angle of depression is formed by this line of sight distance and a horizontal line. So right here, that's the angle of depression. So when we look at these two together, notice the only difference in the angle of depression and the angle of elevation is your perspective. If we're talking about Slim looking up at his friend, we're going to describe this angle of elevation. But if your friend is up here looking down at Slim, then we're going to describe the problem. If we talk about an angle, we're going to describe it as this angle of depression. So it'd be very important to note here that the angle of elevation and the angle of depression here in the same problem, these angles would be congruent because they're alternate interior angles formed by these horizontal parallel lines. Notice if both of these are horizontal, they're going to be parallel. So there are congruent alternate interior angles, the angle of depression and the angle of elevation. There's our line of sight transversal. The angle of elevation and the angle of depression is always formed with the horizontal. They will never have a vertical side. Notice one side of my angle of depression here is horizontal, and one side of my angle of elevation here is horizontal. So angle of depression, one horizontal side, angle of elevation, one horizontal side. So when we're setting up a problem, if it talks about the angle of elevation in this problem, we might put it here. I've described it or labeled it as theta. This would be my angle of elevation. Now, if instead they talked about the angle of depression, which would be up here, could also be theta. Remember, since these are congruent, I could just label it down here on the inside. Because when we draw in our right triangle, then we want theta to be inside the triangle. So you could draw a right triangle up here when it talks about angle of depression, so you could have your vertical here. But if you've drawn it down here, you want to label this as that angle of depression. Notice alpha here can never be an angle of elevation or an angle of depression. So angle of elevation here, angle of depression here, within the same problem, they would have the very same value. The only reason they have different names is because of your perspective. I hope our discussion about angle of elevation and angle of depression has been helpful to you. I'm sure it will help you as you set up application problems for our trigonometry. It's been nice to be with you today. I hope you have a great day.